The Halcyon Grand did not sleep, even when Chicago did. At 4 in the morning, the lobby still glowed like a jewelry case. White marble, brass fixtures polished to a surgical shine, a single arrangement of white orchids on the concierge desk that cost more to replace each week than most of the night staff earned in a shift. The fountain in the center courtyard ran on a timer, a soft ribbon of water that made wealthy guests feel they were somewhere tropical instead of 17 degrees above a frozen river. Richard Kane stood in the service corridor behind the grand staircase in a charcoal coat thrown over silk pajamas. Because sleep had become a negotiation he kept losing. At 51, he was the chief executive of Kane Hospitality Group, a privately held empire of 180 luxury and upper-upscale hotels across North America, conservatively valued at $3.1 billion. His name was etched into the cornerstone of the Halcyon Grand in letters deep enough to catch snow. His face appeared in trade magazines beside words like discipline, yield, and labor efficiency. He did not feel efficient. He felt like a man who owned too many keys and none of the rooms that mattered. Some nights he stood at the penthouse window and counted the lit floors of the Halcyon the way other men counted rosary beads. Each square of light was a rate code, a minibar margin, a labor forecast. He could recite the winter weekend package price without looking. He could not have named 3 housekeepers on the night roster if his foundation donation depended on it. That ignorance had once felt like executive altitude. Now it felt like a design flaw he had mistaken for sophistication. His penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a Gold Coast tower 6 minutes from the hotel by car and 40 years from it by conscience. His wife, Meredith, was in Miami for the season, which had somehow become every season. His son, Ethan, was finishing a semester in Lausanne and answered texts with a delay that felt like a verdict. The dining table in Richard's apartment could seat 12. On most nights, it seated a laptop. On the rare evenings Meredith was in town, they practiced a choreography of polite distance. Separate calendars, shared real estate, conversations that orbited logistics. She was not cruel. Cruelty would have required heat. What they had was climate control. "You married the company long before you married me," she had said during the divorce mediation that never quite became a divorce. "I'm just the leaseholder who got tired of waiting for renovations." He had not argued. Arguments required a theory of home he did not possess. He lived by numbers the way monks lived by prayer. ADR, RevPAR, occupancy, GOPR, labor cost as a percentage of revenue. To him, the people who cleaned the rooms, changed the sheets, polished the brass, and emptied the trash were not narratives. They were line items. If the line rose, you cut. If the line fell, you congratulated yourself in a board packet printed on heavy stock. On paper, the year had been excellent. The Halcyon Grand was running a 78% average occupancy through a brutal Midwestern winter. Suite upgrades were converting at a rate his revenue team called disciplined luxury. A private equity memo circulating among limited partners had used the phrase operational excellence 11 times in 20 pages. Richard had initialed every page. Excellence, he was beginning to suspect, was a word rich men used when they did not want to say distance. Meredith had left a voicemail 2 days earlier from a terrace somewhere sunny. "Ethan says you missed his architecture review again. I told him you were in Asia." "Were you in Asia, Richard? Or were you in a spreadsheet?" He had deleted the message, then restored it, then left it unanswered like a maintenance ticket assigned to no one. In the top drawer of his home office desk lay a Father's Day card from 8 years ago, drawn in green crayon by a much younger Ethan. A stick figure man beside a giant building. Underneath, in a child's uneven print, "Dad owns the tall ones." Richard had framed nothing of Ethan's after that. Framing required a wall that belonged to a family rather than a brand. Staff is not family, his father, Conrad Kane, had told him in 1989, standing in the boiler room of their first motor lodge off I-55, the air thick with heat and bleach. Family asks for forgiveness. Staff asks for raises. Never confuse the two. Conrad had been a hard man made harder by motel nights and thin margins. He taught Richard to walk a property from the loading dock inward, never from the lobby out, because the truth of a hotel lived where guests did not look. He taught him to read a time clock before he read a guest book. He taught him that a complimentary fruit basket was a marketing expense, while an extra hour of housekeeping overtime was a moral failing dressed as compassion. Richard had built his life on that sentence. He had taken one lodge and turned it into a regional chain, then a national portfolio, then a private empire with a foundation that donated tastefully photographed blankets every December. He knew how to look generous in annual reports. He did not know, until the laundry room, how to look a woman in the eye after his subsidiary put her children on the wrong side of a locked door. Until the laundry room. He had come downstairs because the investor call from Singapore ended at 3:40 a.m. and his body refused the performance of rest. The Halcyon was his cathedral. Walking it at night usually restored the old certainty. Everything in its place, every surface earning its keep. He walked the mezzanine first. Ballroom doors locked. A leftover champagne flute on a tray outside Salon B. Lipstick print intact, abandoned as casually as a rumor. In the executive lounge, a barista station slept under a stainless cover. On 28, where the presidential suite overlooked the Black River, a Do Not Disturb placard hung like a tiny flag of sovereignty. Richard almost turned back upstairs. Almost. Instead, he took the staff elevator. The one guests never saw. The one that smelled faintly of detergent and warm linen. The doors opened onto basement level B, where the hotel's true metabolism lived. Industrial washers, rolling carts stacked with pressed sheets, a cage of lost and found umbrellas, a time clock with a cracked plastic cover. That was where he found them. A woman in a faded navy housekeeping tunic sat upright in a metal folding chair beside a dryer that hummed like a distant airplane. In her lap slept a boy no older than 4. His cheek mashed against her shoulder, one sock half off. On a folding table beside them, a girl of 8 sat with a workbook open, pencil moving carefully under the yellow buzz of a utility light. A pink backpack hung from the table's edge. A small birthday candle, unused, lay across the cover of a math book like a fragile piece of evidence. The air smelled of fabric softener and warm dust. Someone had folded a stack of hand towels into exact hotel rectangles and placed them on a cart as if order itself could keep the night from collapsing. Against the far wall, 2 pairs of children's shoes were lined up with a precision that broke something in Richard's chest. The shoes of people trying to remain civilized inside an emergency. The woman looked up. For half a second, Richard saw only a housekeeper startled by management. Then he saw the other details. A suitcase under the table, a grocery bag of cereal and apples, a child's winter coat draped over a laundry cart, and, half visible from the unzipped front pocket of the pink backpack, a folded legal document with a blue stamp. "Mr. Kane," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes calculated exits the way prey calculated brush. "I can explain." "What's your name?" he asked. Though some part of him already knew he had walked into a sentence he would not be able to unread. "Elena Vargas. Night housekeeping. Floors 20 through 28. The girl closed her workbook without being told. The boy stirred, murmured something in Spanish and settled. Again. "Mama," Sophia whispered. "Is he the police?" "No," Elena said, never looking away from Richard. "He's the building." Richard's gaze returned to the blue stamp. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the backpack. Elena's jaw tightened. Pride and fear fought a short war on her face. Then she nodded once, as if granting a search warrant to the man who already owned the building. He slid the paper free. Notice to vacate. Kane Residential Workforce Housing LLC. Property, 4400 Mannheim Road, Unit 6C. Tenant, Elena M. Vargas. Reason, non-payment/lease default. Vacate by January 28, 2026. Executed February 2, 2026. The date was 11 days ago. Richard read it twice because the first time his mind refused the logo. Kane Residential was his. Not a partner. Not a franchise. A subsidiary created 3 years earlier with press releases about dignified housing solutions for hospitality workers. Investors loved the language. The model was simple. Build or acquire mid-density units near major hotels, offer preferred rates to staff, then manage the portfolio for yield like any other residential asset. Preferred. That was the word they had sold. The launch dinner for Kane Residential had been held in the Halcyon's ballroom under chandeliers that cost more than a year of Elena's rent. Richard had given a toast about dignity. Derek Shore had shown a slide deck with smiling stock photos of diverse workers holding keys. Investors applauded the projected yield. No one in the room that night worked a graveyard shift. No one asked what happened when preferred rent met cut hours. The champagne was excellent. The omission was structural. Elena watched him read. When he looked up, she did not cry. She looked tired in a way that had nothing left for theater. "I didn't steal anything," she said. "I clock in. I clock out. The laundry is warm. The kids can do homework under a light. I clean the linen cage every morning before shift change so no one sees. I know it's against policy. I'll leave before the day crew comes." "You've been living here," Richard said. It was not a question. "For 11 nights, Elena answered. "After the Marshalls. My sister in Cicero has 1 bedroom and a boyfriend who drinks. Shelters were full. The hotel has heat." The birthday candle rolled an inch when the dryer shifted into a new cycle. "Whose birthday?" Richard asked stupidly because the human detail was easier than the corporate one. Sophia looked at her mother, then at Richard. "Mateo's. He turned 4 on Sunday. We were going to light it in the apartment. Then there was no apartment." The dryer beeped. Somewhere above them, a guest on 22 pressed a button for ice and expected the world to answer. Richard did not call security. That fact alone would later unsettle his attorneys. He sat on an overturned laundry bin 3 feet away, coat still on, pajamas ridiculous in the industrial light, and asked the questions his dashboards never asked. Elena had worked for Kane Hospitality for 3 years and 2 months. Before that, 2 years at a downtown Marriott. Before that, a short marriage to a line cook who left when Mateo was 9 months old and now sent money, when he could, which meant almost never. Her mother had died in Puebla. Her English was excellent because she had forced it to be, studying flashcards on the blue line between doubles. Her credit had been good until the urgent care visit for Mateo's asthma in November. The week her hours were cut during a seasonal optimization. The visit had cost $460 after insurance. She had paid it because Mateo's wheeze at night sounded like a door that would not stay shut. Then the preferred rent at Mannheim rose by $90 because comps moved. Then banquet overtime vanished. Then the portal refused to plan. "They cut nights on my floor from 5 to 3, she said. Then Kane Residential raised the preferred rent because the market comps moved. I paid November late. I paid half of December. I called the residential office 9 times. They told me to use the portal. The portal said, no payment plans available for workforce units. Workforce units, Richard repeated. Yes, Elena said. The ones they put in the brochure with smiling maids and the sentence about dignity. She told him about the morning of the Marshal. Sophia packing the pink backpack for school as if school could still organize a day that had lost its address. Mateo asking if the men in uniforms were from the hotel. A neighbor filming until Elena asked her to stop. The science fair poster tearing when a mattress caught the corner of the doorframe. I cleaned Suite 280 for the night before, she said. Turn down service. Chocolate on the pillow. The guest left a $5 tip and a note that said the room felt like home. I put the tip in Mateo's jacket so I wouldn't spend it on the bus. Sophia returned to her workbook, pencil scratching, as if math could stabilize a collapsing floor. Richard looked at the eviction notice again. At the bottom, in a clerk's indifferent handwriting, was a phone number for Kane Residential Collections. He knew that number. It routed to a call center in Phoenix that his COO had praised for reducing average handle time by 22%. He had applauded in a meeting. He had eaten a pastry while applauding. He asked one last question he had never asked a worker in 51 years of breathing hotel air. What did you need that week? The real answer. Not the portal answer. Elena considered him. A human being who could freeze the filing for 30 days and put 2 nights back on my schedule. That was it. Not a miracle. A pause. A pause. The cheapest mercy in the building, and the one his system had made impossible. Conrad Kane's voice rose in him like old smoke. In 1994, when Richard was 20, a desk clerk at the Motor Lodge had stolen $80 from the till to pay for her child's antibiotics. Conrad fired her the same afternoon and made Richard watch. If you forgive theft because the story is sad, Conrad said, you teach every employee that's sad. Ness is currency. Sadness is infinite. Cash is not. Richard had nodded. He had practiced nodding until it became identity. There had been another afternoon, less discussed in family lore. A housekeeper named Ruth had asked Conrad for 3 days off unpaid to sit with her dying sister. Conrad granted the days and then, when she returned, cut her permanent schedule from 5 to 3 because reliability flags. Richard had asked why kindness and punishment arrived in the same week. Conrad answered, because guests do not care why a room is late, only that it is late. Now, in the laundry room of his flagship hotel, sadness was not asking to be currency. It was sitting under a utility light with a workbook and a candle that had never been lit. Reliability, too, looked different when the person being measured had nowhere to sleep between shifts. Get your things, he said quietly. Elena stiffened. You're firing me. No, Richard said. I'm taking you out of a basement. Then I'm going to find out how many other people my company put here without admitting it. They rode the staff elevator in silence. In the back alley, Richard's driver, an ex-cop named Paul who had learned not to ask questions between midnight and dawn, opened the Suburban's doors and then froze when he saw the children. Mr. Kane. Hotel first for coats and food, Richard said. Then Mannheim Road. And Paul, no press, no group chat, no heroic narrative. Just drive. Paul drove. At a red light, he said, almost to the windshield. My sister got turned out of a place in Austin in 19. She slept in her car with a dog. People love hotels. They don't love the people who keep hotels from smelling like strangers. Richard met his eyes in the mirror. Noted. I'm not asking you to be a saint, Paul said. I'm asking you not to look away twice. At a 24-hour diner 2 blocks away, Matteo ate pancakes with both hands. Sophia asked if she still had to finish her fractions. Elena sat with her coffee untouched, watching Richard the way AP. Urson watches a fuse. Paul waited in the Suburban with the engine running and the heat on low. Through the diner window, Richard could see him pretending not to watch, the way good drivers pretended not to hear arguments in the back seat. A waitress refilled coffee without asking names. The fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly accused. I don't want a camera, Elena said. I don't want a charity check for Instagram. I want my job, a door that locks, and a rent number that matches the hours you actually give me. That's not charity, Richard said. That's arithmetic. Then do arithmetic, Elena replied. Don't do theater. Sophia slid her workbook across the table. If a fraction is 3/4, and you take away 1/4, how much is left? Richard looked at the problem, then at Elena, then back at the page. 1/2, he said. Sophia nodded, satisfied that at least one adult in the booth could still do simple math. Mama said rich people forget halves. They only count wholes. Elena did not apologize for her daughter. Richard did not ask her to. Matteo, syrup on his chin, asked if the diner was a hotel too. No, Mijo, Elena said. Hotels have nicer chairs and meaner math. Richard almost flinched, then let the sentence stand. Meaner math was the most accurate review his company had received all year. He paid the check in cash, left a tip large enough to be useful and small enough not to become a performance, and walked them back to the car. On the way to Mannheim Road, Matteo fell asleep against Elena's side. Sophia watched the city move past the tinted glass as if memorizing exits. 4400 Mannheim Road looked like a promise designed by a committee that had never missed a rent payment. For brick stories, newish cladding, a landscape strip of ornamental grass that had died in winter and not been replaced. In the lobby, a digital screen looped Kane residential branding. Your work, your home, your path up. A fake plant stood under the screen with dust on its leaves. Someone had taped a handwritten note to the intercom. Elevator out. Use stairs. Management aware. Aware. Another brochure word. Unit 6C was empty and cold. The door still bore a court sticker ghost where tape had been pulled. Inside, the pale outline of a couch on carpet. A closet with 3 empty hangers. A child's sticker of a cartoon sun stubbornly clinging to a bedroom wall. Elena stood in the doorway and did not enter. They threw the mattresses down the chute, she said. Sophia's science fair poster got ripped. A man from the management office told me if I cried in the hallway, it would escalate the situation. Richard walked the empty rooms counting the failures the way he usually counted fixtures. No heat. A kitchen faucet that dripped into silence. A smoke detector with a dead battery chirping every 30 seconds like a mechanical cricket mocking the word home. In the bathroom, a toothbrush still lay behind the faucet, missed by whoever had cleared the unit into garbage bags. He picked it up, then set it down again because owning a building did not entitle him to touch what remained of a life. On the first floor, he knocked on Unit 1A. A man in a kitchen porter's jacket opened the door on a chain. His name was Luis Ortega. He worked banquet plating at the Halcyon. He had lived at Mannheim for 14 months. "You the owner?" Luis asked, eyes flicking to Richard's coat. "I am." Luis laughed once, without humor. "Then you should know the elevator's been broken 9 days. Mrs. Kim in 4B has a bad hip. We carry her groceries. Preferred housing, right? Preferred for who?" He let the chain off after a long look at Elena and the children. His apartment was small and clean, smelling of onions and coffee. A work schedule was taped to the fridge in red marker. 2 of the night shifts had been crossed out. "They cut banquet hours after New Year's," Luis said. Same week residential sent a notice that market adjustments would apply to renewals. You know what a market adjustment is when your paycheck shrinks. It's a polite robbery. In 2F, a front desk associate named Aisha Cole showed him screenshots of portal messages on her phone. Payment arrangement denied. Account flagged for turnover. Please maintain timely payments to avoid legal action. "I sat in the residential office for an hour on my day off," Aisha said. "The clerk told me the system doesn't allow exceptions for workforce tenants because exceptions create precedent, and precedent creates exposure." I said, "Exposure to what?" She said, "To softness." In 3C, a laundry attendant named Bridget Nguyen said her hours were cut the same week her rent rose by $75. When she asked for a transfer to a cheaper unit, the office said the waitlist was closed to current residents to maintain market flexibility. "They want empty units they can reprice," Bridget said. "Long-term workers are a problem. We know the building. We talk to each other. We remember what the brochure promised." On the 4th floor, Mrs. Kim opened the door in a cardigan and slippers, her cane hooked over the arm of a chair. She had cleaned guest floors at a Kane Airport hotel for 11 years before her hip made night shifts impossible. She now worked mornings in the Halcyon's flower shop, trimming stems for orchids that guests never asked the price of. "I do not want trouble," she told Richard carefully. "But Elena brought me soup when I could not walk stairs. If your company puts people like her outside, then your path up is only a slogan on a screen." Richard wrote every sentence in his phone notes like evidence. Outside, a metro train rattled past the embankment, and Mateo pointed at it as if motion itself were proof that the world continued. Before leaving Mannheim, he stopped at the management office. A young leasing agent recognized him too late to hide a half-eaten granola bar. On her screen, open and glowing, was Elena's file marked closed, possession recovered. In the notes field someone had typed, "Unit ready for market reset. Projected uplift $140 per MO." "Who wrote that?" Richard asked. The agent swallowed. "The system suggests comments after lockout. We just accept them." "Stop accepting them," Richard said, "and print every file currently tagged market reset in this building." She printed 41 pages. He left with the stack under his arm like an indictment. In the Suburban, Elena stared at the printout edges without reading them. "They price the empty faster than they answer the phone," she said. "Not after today," Richard answered, and hoped the sentence would survive contact with his own board. By 9 o'clock that morning, he was in a glass conference room on the 32nd floor of Kane Hospitality headquarters with 3 binders, 2 attorneys, and Derek Shore, the president of Kane Residential, a man with perfect hair and the calm of someone who believed spreadsheets were weather. Outside the windows, Lake Michigan looked polite and expensive. Inside, a tray of untouched pastries sat beneath a logo that still used the word dignity in its tagline. "Richard, if this is about the Vargas matter," Derek began, already smiling. "It's a standard default. 60 days. Multiple notices. We followed Illinois statute to the letter. Workforce housing only works if the yield holds. If we start custom hardship exceptions, every resident becomes a negotiation, and the pension funds who bought into the workforce thesis will walk." Richard placed Elena's eviction notice on the table. Then he placed a printed punch history from the Halcyon time clock. Then he placed a screenshot of the portal message. No payment plans available for workforce units. She worked 19 days in January, Richard said, including New Year's Eve when banquet ran until 3. Your portal denied a payment plan on January 11th while my hotel was posting record ADR. Explain how a woman cleaning my suites becomes a turnover opportunity in a building we marketed as her path up. Derek's smile thinned. The residential side and the hospitality side are separate P&Ls. Cross-subsidizing creates echo. Unting noise. You approved that separation. You signed the operating thesis. There it was again. The sentence that had become Richard's shadow. You signed it. One attorney cleared her throat. Any public admission that workforce policy was misaligned could invite claims. We already invited children into a laundry room, Richard said. Continue. Derek turned a laptop toward the room. Delinquency under 2%. Occupancy 94. Average days to turnover for vacated workforce units. 18. Manager bonuses tied to that number in yellow highlight. This is what you asked for, Derek said. Predictability. Clean files. No soft inventory. The algorithm flags accounts at day 15. Legal packets auto-generate at day 30. We don't waste labor on stories. Stories don't close quarters. How many Kane Hotel employees live in Kane residential units statewide? Richard asked. An analyst checked a laptop. 2,140. How many workforce evictions last year? A longer pause. 312. How many of those had active Kane hospitality punch records in the 90 days before filing? The query ran. The analyst's face changed. 227. The room cooled. Richard thought of Sophia's pencil under the utility light, of Mateo's unlit candle, of Conrad in the boiler room teaching him that sadness was infinite. Maybe sadness was infinite. So was the damage of pretending it was irrelevant. Print the bonus schedule, Richard said. Print every auto-deny rule in the portal. And Derek, do not call Elena. Do not offer her a camera-ready reinstatement. If you do, you're finished before lunch. He did not sleep that afternoon. He sat in his office with the door closed and read the workforce housing offering memo from 3 years earlier. The one with the glossy photos of smiling employees carrying tote bags into clean lobbies. The memo promised stability for the labor force that sustains luxury hospitality. In the appendix, in smaller type, it promised investors a target net yield and a delinquency protocol aligned with conventional multifamily standards. Aligned. That word had done the killing. In an old operations folder, he also found a photocopied page from Conrad's notebook dated October 1994. Under the fired clerk's name, Conrad had written, "Do not discuss child's illness in staff meeting. Sets precedent." Richard stared at the ink until the letters blurred. His father had not been a cartoon monster. He had been a man terrified of precedent, and he had taught his son to fear the same ghost. Precedent meant one exception becoming 100. Precedent meant the thin margin of a motor lodge in 1989 still dictating the ethics of a $3.1 billion company in 2026. At 2:10 p.m., Meredith called from Miami. "I saw a rumor in a hospitality Slack," she said. "Something about a maid and children in the halcyon basement. Please tell me this is not going to become a brand event." "It already is," Richard said. "Just not the kind you mean." "Richard," she said softer. "You cannot save every sad story in your portfolio." "I'm not trying to save every sad story," he said. "I'm trying to stop writing them." After she hung up, he texted Ethan in Lausanne. "I missed your review. That was wrong. Tell me when I can watch the recording." The reply came 40 minutes later, short and almost kind. "Okay. Don't make it a press thing." Elena agreed to meet him at Grace and Mercy Family Shelter only after Pastor Hahn confirmed Richard would bring no cameras. The shelter basement smelled of bleach and boiled noodles. A mural of paper hands covered one wall, each hand labeled with a child's name and a city. Elena sat on the edge of a cot with Sophia beside her and Mateo asleep under a donated dinosaur blanket. She had changed out of her tunic into a gray sweater with a pulled thread at the cuff. Without the uniform, she looked younger and older at once. Pastor Hahn poured 2 paper cups of tea and stayed within earshot, not as a chaperone exactly, more as a witness who had seen to. Oh, many men arrive with checks and leave with absolution. I checked your offer, Elena said before he could speak. 2 months free at Mannheim, restored lease, no late fees, and a hardship review. That's a press release in lease form. Then reject it, Richard said. Tell me what clean looks like. Elena held his gaze. Clean looks like this. 1. My job stays with hours restored to what I had before your seasonal cut. 2. Rent capped at 30% of my actual take-home, reviewed quarterly against my punch records, not against market comps on a street I can't afford. 3. No residential manager gets a bonus for turnover in workforce units. 4. You put that in writing for every Kane employee in Kane Housing, not just me, so I am not your proof of goodness. Sophia looked up from a shelter library book. And the elevator. Richard almost smiled. And the elevator. Elena did not smile. Also, Matteo gets a birthday that happens in a kitchen that belongs to us. Not as content, as life. Done, Richard said. Say it slower, Elena said. Men like you say done too fast. So he said it again, point by point, while Pastor Hahn took notes like a clerk of conscience. When he finished, Elena asked one more question. If the board pushes back, will you keep the kids out of it? No interviews. No human face of reform. Sophia already knows how to be quiet in adult rooms. I don't want her learning how to be useful to rich guilt. No interviews, Richard said. No faces. Just policy. Pastor Hahn nodded once. Then maybe this is not theater. After Richard left the shelter, Sophia asked Elena if the rich man was lying. I don't know yet, Elena said. Lying is easy. Keeping a promise for 6 months is harder. We judge him by the door, not the speech. That night Matteo slept through the heater's clank for the first time in a week. Elena sat awake and listed, on the back of a shelter intake form, every phone call she had made since November. 9 to residential, 4 to HR, 2 to a legal aid line. The T rang until voicemail. 1 to her sister that ended in shouting. She folded the list and put it in her pocket. If Richard's reform was real, the list would become history. If not, it would become evidence. The emergency board meeting happened on a Tuesday under a sky the color of wet concrete. The conference room on Michigan Avenue had a view designed to make dissent feel small. Todd Ellison, a principal investor with a voice trained on earnings calls, called the proposal sentimentality with a burn rate. A pension advisor from Boston warned that blurring labor and residential enforcement creates soft collateral. Derek Shore sat at the far end with a resignation letter already drafted in his bag. Richard clicked to a slide that had nothing sentimental on it. Average cost to replace a trained housekeeper at our Chicago properties. $6,400 in recruitment, uniforming, training, and lost quality scores, he said. Average cost of a workforce eviction including unit turnover, legal, vacancy, and releasing, $5,100. Average cost of a 90-day rent bridge plus schedule stabilization for a temporary hardship case, $1,270. We are paying premiums to dispose of people we already spent money training, then congratulating ourselves for labor efficiency. He clicked again. 227 Kane employees were pushed through our own residential eviction pipeline last year while still punching clocks in our hotels. That is not a market outcome. That is a design. Silence, then the particular quiet of rich people doing math against their instincts. Ellison tapped a pen. And if delinquency spikes? If word spreads that Kane Housing is soft, then we manage hardship like adults instead of running a conveyor, Richard said. I'm dissolving the wall between hospitality labor policy and residential enforcement for all Kane-owned workforce units. Effective immediately, no eviction filing against a current Kane employee without a mandatory human review tied to punch data and a temporary schedule or rent adjustment option. Kane residential management bonuses will no longer include turnover targets for workforce inventory. And my personal dividend for the next 24 months funds a staff stability reserve $18 million for short-term bridges. You're rewriting the thesis, Ellison said. I'm correcting it, Richard said. We sold dignity and delivered a conventional eviction pipeline with better photography. One board member asked whether this made Kane a social agency. Richard answered without raising his voice. No, it makes us a company that stops charging our workers rent with one hand while cutting their hours with the other. Derek Shore resigned by email that evening. Richard accepted without a farewell lunch. Legal sent a draft termination response recommending mutual appreciation language. Richard deleted the appreciation and left only the facts. Bonus incentives tied to workforce turnover were discontinued. Portal auto-deny rules were void. Shore's separation was effective immediately. He did not need poetry for a man who had called stories a waste of labor. That same night he called Marisol Ruiz, whose number he had gotten from a legal aid director who owed him no favors and gave the contact anyway. "I need someone who will distrust me in writing," Richard said. "I bill for that," Marisol said. "Good. Start tomorrow. Freeze authority, full access, and a budget that does not require my charm to release." She paused. "If I catch you performing goodness, I quit publicly." "If I'm performing," Richard said, "I deserve it." Before the reforms could harden into memos, Richard did something his father would have called unprofessional and his younger self would have called theater. He worked, not as a stunt for cameras, as an audit with a body. For 3 nights he arrived at the Halcyon at 10 p.m. in plain clothes, badged in through staff entrance, and followed the night rhythm he had spent decades summarizing into ages. He watched housekeepers strip rooms after late checkouts, the cartwheels squeaking on corridor carpet designed to muffle guest footsteps and therefore also muffle worker exhaustion. He watched a night engineer patch a leaking ice machine with the patience of a man who knew the morning shift would get the compliment if the fix held. He watched a security guard walk the garage with a flashlight, checking cars as if loneliness itself might steal a sedan. On the second night, he rode with Elena's floor team for an hour, saying little. A younger housekeeper named Tasha whispered, not unkindly, "You walk like someone who doesn't know where to put his hands." "I don't," Richard admitted. They entered a vacated suite on 26. The guest had left champagne sticky on a marble counter and a tip that amounted to apology money. Elena remade the bed with corners so sharp they looked mechanical. Sophia, he knew, was at a coworker friend's apartment for those hours. Mateo, too. The informal childcare network of night workers was a second infrastructure his company had never funded and always relied on. "You see now?" Elena asked without looking up from the sheet. "I see the part 1 priced as invisible," Richard said. "Good," she said. "Don't romanticize it. Just stop cutting it." On the third night, in the break room behind laundry, he found a corkboard of photocopied schedules, bilingual notices about bus route changes, and a handwritten list titled "If Hours Get Cut, Who Can Watch Kids?" There were 9 names. 2 had been crossed out with the note moved/evicted. He photographed the board, then deleted the photo, then wrote the names into his notebook by hand instead. Some evidence, he decided, should not live in a cloud owned by the same machine that had made the list necessary. Near dawn on the third night, he sat alone in the executive lounge he usually reserved for investors and drank hotel coffee that tasted like ambition gone cold. Through the window, Chicago's first buses began stitching the dark with Ving light. He thought of Conrad in the boiler room and of Ruth's cut schedule and of Elena's pause. He thought of how many times he had called cruelty by better names. Optimization, alignment, flexibility, precedent. Then he opened a blank document and typed the first draft of the staff stability policy in plain English, the kind a housekeeper could read without a lawyer. If the attorneys wanted to decorate it later, they could. Clarity would come first. The morning before the board vote's operational rollout, Paul drove him past Mannheim Road one more time. Snow was coming in thin needles. In the lobby, the digital slogan still glowed. Richard stood under it and said aloud to no one, "Your path up," until the words sounded like a joke told at a funeral. Marisol met him there with a banker's box of files. She had spent a decade fighting companies like his. Now she sat inside Kane with written authority to freeze filings, a fact that still seemed to offend half the residential staff. On her first morning, she had told Richard, "If your people try to route around me with priority guests language, I will document it and send it to you at 5:01 a.m. every time." "Good," he had said. "These are the near misses," she said now. "Accounts at day 12 to day 29. If we do nothing, half become filings by April." They sat on the lobby bench meant for deliveries and went through names. A banquet captain with a broken transmission. A spa attendant caring for a mother with dialysis. A dishwasher whose roommate had vanished with the rent money. None of them were abstractions. All of them had been one portal click from becoming Elena. You understand that if this works, Marisol said, people will still be angry at you for years. Anger is part of the repair. Don't ask them to convert it into gratitude on your timeline. I'm not recruiting fans, Richard said. I'm trying to stop manufacturing enemies out of employees. Marisol almost smiled. That sentence would have gotten you laughed out of a hospital at Y conference last year. Then the conferences were the problem, Richard said. There was also the quieter work of language. Communications wanted a campaign. Kane Cares. A soft-focus video. A founder letter. Richard killed it in one meeting. No campaign, he said. If we need a slogan to prove we stopped evicting our own night staff, we have already failed the press release test. Publish the policy. Publish the reserve size. Publish the eviction drop every quarter. No music. No orphans of labor aesthetics. The communications director looked personally injured. Stakeholders expect narrative. Stakeholders can read a table, Richard said. In late March, Ethan video called from Lausanne with a background of gray European rain. He had watched a Swiss news clip about hotel workers striking in Geneva and wanted to know if his father's company was one of the bad ones. Richard did not perform humility. He told him the laundry room story without naming Elena's children in detail. He told him about Conrad's notebook. He told him about the bonus line highlighted in yellow. Ethan was quiet for a long time. So the building was honest, he said finally. And the ownership wasn't. Yes. Are you fixing it because it's right? Or because you got caught by your own basement? Richard considered lying and chose not to. Both. I wish it had been only the first. I'm using the second to force the first to stay. Ethan nodded once, the way young men nod when they decide a parent is still incomplete but no longer unreachable. Send me the quarterly table when you publish it. I will. 2 days after the board directive, Richard sat in the back of Cook County's eviction courtroom without announcing himself. The room processed people like a conveyor with better lighting than Mannheim's hallway and worse hope. A judge called names. Attorneys for management companies spoke in practice paragraphs. Tenants stood alone more often than not, holding folders and children and phones with dead batteries. One woman cried, without sound. One man asked for 2 weeks and received 4 days. A clerk stamped papers with the bored precision of weather. Richard watched 12 cases in 90 minutes. In 4 of them, the landlord entity had a hospitality affiliate somewhere in the ownership stack. In 1, the tenant wore a kitchen porter jacket under a winter coat. Richard did not intervene. He was not there to become a courtroom hero. He was there to stop pretending his industry's violence happened only in other men's portfolios. Outside on the courthouse steps, Marisol found him. You look sick, she said. I built a prettier version of that room, Richard said, and called it workforce innovation. Then go invent something uglier and truer, Marisol replied. Policy without courtroom memory is just branding. Before the apartment return, there was a small Saturday that never made the news. Elena asked Richard not to come. Pastor Hahn supervised a quiet gathering in the shelter's back kitchen. Pancake mix, strawberries, 1 candle. Matteo wore a paper crown someone had made from a discarded flyer. Sophia counted to 4 twice, carefully, as if numbers could protect a wish. Elena lit the candle and said, Make it ordinary, Mijo. Ordinary is the gift. Matteo wished for a door. When Richard heard about it later from Pastor Hahn, he did not ask for a photo. He transferred the next tranche into the Staff Stability Reserve and approved emergency bus passes for night workers whose childcare depended on 3 transfers across a frozen city. It was not cinematic. It was the kind of fix Conrad would have dismissed as softness and guests would never notice, which was precisely why it mattered. The hard part was not the board. The hard part was the unglamorous middle. Work orders, union notices, portal software rebuilt so no payment plan, stopped being the default, elevator contractors who actually arrived, and Marisol Ruiz using the freeze authority Richard had given her until the machine stopped inventing shortcuts. The first week, regional managers tried exactly that. One argued that VIP guest recovery weekends justified temporary hour cuts without residential notice. Marisol froze 14 filings before lunch and emailed Richard the packet with a subject line that read, simply, softness, documented. IT rebuilt the portal in 18 days. The auto-deny button for workforce payment plans was removed. In its place appeared a mandatory fields list: current employer verification, recent punch export, hardship category, advocate assignment. If any field was empty, the system refused to generate a legal packet. Attorneys complained that the workflow was slower. Richard told them slower was the point. He visited Mannheim Road twice a week for a month. Not for applause, for pattern. The elevator returned with a shudder and a smell of new grease. Mrs. Kim rode it with a dignity that made him look at his shoes. Luis Ortega still did not trust him, which Richard decided was healthy. Trust, he was learning, was not a ribbon cutting. It was a boring streak of kept promises. Aisha Cole stopped him in the lobby once and showed a new portal screen on her phone. "It asked me what happened," she said, almost suspicious. "Not just how much I owe." Bridget Nguyen transferred into a smaller unit without losing her place in the building. The office no longer called long-term workers a waitlist problem. Someone had finally rewritten the sentence. Not every repair was clean. 2 households had already left Illinois. One former banquet runner refused any cane lease on principle and told Richard, through Marisol, that he could keep his stability reserve. Richard did not argue. Absolution was not a KPI. At the Halcyon, Elena returned to floors 20 through 28 on a restored 5-night schedule. Housekeeping supervisors were instructed, in writing, that schedule cuts affecting workforce tenants had to be reported to Marisol's desk the same day. One supervisor quit rather than do social work. Richard replaced him with a woman from the airport. Property who had raised 3 kids on housekeeper wages and did not need a seminar on why heat mattered. On a Saturday in late February, Elena turned the key to Unit 6C again. Snowmelt made dark maps on the sidewalk outside. Inside the building, someone had replaced the lobby plant and wiped dust from the digital screen. The slogan still said, "Your path up." Under it, taped slightly crooked, a new paper notice listed Marisol's office hours and a line that read, "If your hours change, your rent review starts the same week." The apartment was not a magazine spread. It was better. Heat, a working faucet, a table with 4 chairs, a twin bed with a blue comforter for Mateo, a small desk by the window for Sophia. In the kitchen, a grocery bag weighted with pancake mix and strawberries. On the counter, in a cheap glass cup, stood 1 birthday candle and a box of matches. Mateo ran to the bedroom and bounced once on the mattress, then looked back as if the floor might vanish. "Are we allowed to stay until my next birthday?" he asked. Elena knelt and pulled him close. "Longer," she said into his hair. "This is home." Sophia set her pink backpack on the desk, unzipped it, and took out the math workbook from the laundry room. She lined her pencils up like a person reclaiming ceremony. Then she walked to the window, pressed her palm to the glass, and watched a metro train slide past the embankment. "It looks the same," she said, "but we can lock it now." Richard stood in the doorway with his hands in his coat pockets, feeling like a man attending a restitution hearing rather than a celebration. Elena walked over and handed him a folded punch card copy from her first week back at full hours. "I clocked in on time," she said. "I'll keep doing that. You keep doing the elevator and the portal. We don't have to like each other for the arithmetic to work." "I know," Richard said. She hesitated, then added quieter, "Thank you for not making us a video." He nodded. "You were never content." Before he left, Mateo tugged his coat. "Are you the man who owns the tall ones?" Richard thought of Ethan's crayon card. "I own too many tall ones," he said. "I'm trying to make the smaller ones safer." Mateo accepted this with the solemnity of 4. "Okay, don't take the candle." "I won't." Paul was waiting downstairs. He did not ask how it went. He only said, "Kids look lighter," which was not a metric Richard had ever put in a board packet and somehow felt more accurate than RevPAR. As he left, he heard the deadbolt slide home solid, ordinary, sacred. Elena's first restored weeks were not a montage of gratitude. They were work. She cleaned 28 rooms on a Saturday after a medical conference checkout wave, her cart rattling with miniature shampoos and the particular loneliness of luxury discarded by morning. At 2 a.m. she texted the only sentence Richard had asked her to send if anything broke again. Hours held. "Kids with Rosa. Door still mine." He did not reply with inspiration. He replied, "Copy." In April, he flew to Atlanta, Dallas, and Newark on a tour that communications was forbidden to brand. At each Kane flagship, he asked the same underground questions. Where do night workers sleep between doubles? Which residential partners shared ownership? Which portals auto-denied plans? In Newark, a night auditor showed him a supply closet where 2 employees had rotated naps during a storm week. In Dallas, a cook laughed in his face and said, "You owning the problem doesn't mean you invented listening." Richard wrote that down too. The staff stability reserve began paying out in uneven, practical amounts. A transmission, 2 weeks of rent, a child care gap during spring break, an inhaler, and the shift recovery that made the inhaler affordable. Marisol rejected 3 applications that looked like managers trying to launder overtime disputes into charity. She approved 11 that looked like Elena with different names. A trade newsletter eventually ran a dry item. Kane Hospitality links workforce rent enforcement to punch data. Eviction. And filings fall. No soft focus photo. Ellison forwarded it with a single line. Fine. Don't let it become a religion. Richard forwarded Ethan's line to himself so he would not lose it. Buildings fail when they forget who maintains them. 6 months later, Channel 7 did not lead with a billionaire's face. The segment stood outside 4400 Mannheim Road in summer heat. The ornamental grass was alive. Kids played near a patched fence. A repaired elevator chimed somewhere behind open lobby doors. The reporter cited numbers without soft music. 206 Kane employee households stabilized through the staff stability reserve. Workforce evictions down 71% across the Illinois portfolio. Housekeeper retention at Chicago Kane hotels up 19%. Turnover costs down enough that even Todd Ellison had stopped calling it a hobby in private emails that somehow still reached Richard's desk. Luis Ortega appeared for 6 seconds, arms crossed. "I still don't clap for owners," he said. "But the elevator works, and Bridget didn't get disappeared into turnover. That's not nothing." Mrs. Kim, interviewed beside the flower cart at the Halcyon, said only, "People should sleep where they work's money can reach." Elena appeared on camera in her tunic during a break, hair pulled back, eyes clear. "He didn't save me," she said. "He stopped a system from pretending I was temporary. There's a difference. I still clean rooms. My kids still do homework. The only new thing is that the door locks from the inside and opens again in the morning." In his Gold Coast penthouse, Richard watched with the sound on and his phone face down. Meredith was back from Miami for 2 weeks. They ate dinner at opposite ends of the long table like polite co-owners of a failed joint venture. Ethan had sent a link to his architecture review recording. Richard watched it twice, pausing on a slide where his son had written in the corner, "Buildings fail when they forget who maintains them." The silence in the apartment was still large. Tea no longer felt like a product he had purchased. It felt like space he had finally stopped filling with numbers long enough to hear a dryer hum in a basement and understand it as an alarm. That August he walked basement level B of the Halcyon alone after midnight, not hunting for a story, checking that the laundry was only laundry. Warm linen, carts in rows, a time clock with a new plastic cover. No suitcase under a table. No birthday candle on a math book. The absence felt like the first honest luxury he had allowed himself in years. On his way out, he passed Tasha in the corridor, cart loaded for an early arrivals block. "You still walk like you don't know where to put your hands," she said. "I'm learning," Richard said. "Learn slower," she answered. "Slower is how workers survive owners." In September, Sophia brought home a school essay titled "A Place That Stays." She did not use the word billionaire. She wrote about a dryer that hummed like an airplane and a door that finally clicked. Elena folded the essay into a drawer, not for evidence, for memory. Mateo, now fluent in the politics of ordinary life, announced to Mrs. Kim that his birthday wish had worked because wishes were just requests that needed a better manager. Mrs. Kim patted his head and said, "Then keep the good manager nervous." On the last page of Conrad Kane's old operations notebook, the one with boiler pressures and the commandment about sadness, Richard wrote a new line beneath his father's handwriting. "Staff are not family. Staff are not inventory either. A hotel is only as honest as the rooms its workers can afford to sleep in." Then, smaller, almost as a private amendment, precedent cuts both ways. You can set a precedent for cruelty, or you can set one for refusing to call cruelty efficiency. Epilogue. A note from the author. Richard Kane and Elena Vargas are fictional. The halcyon grand, Kane residential, and the conversations in this story were imagined. The pressure underneath them is not. Hotel and service workers in the United States are among the workers most likely to face unstable schedules, low wages, and housing insecurity in the same cities where luxury hospitality posts record rates. Across the country, millions of renter households remain one missed paycheck or medical bill from eviction court. Workforce housing can be a genuine bridge or a nicer label on the same enforcement machine. Many people who make luxury possible cannot afford a stable place within a long commute of the buildings they maintain. When hours are cut and rent is raised in the same month by companies that share an owner, the result is not a personal failure. It is a designed collision. The story is fiction. The laundry rooms are real. The portals that say no are real. The children doing homework under utility lights are real more often than comfortable people want to admit. If you or someone you know is facing eviction or housing instability, call 211 to connect with local rental assistance and legal aid. In many cities, right-to-counsel programs can get tenants a free lawyer in housing court. You do not have to navigate the portal alone. If you manage people, own buildings, or sign contracts that turn hardship into turnover opportunity, sit with one question before you close this tab. Who sleeps in the rooms your numbers refuse to see? Thank you for staying until the end. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, leave a comment with where you're watching from, and share it with someone who needs the reminder. A paycheck and a home are supposed to be connected. When a company severs that connection, dignity becomes a brochure word. The work of repair begins when someone with keys finally walks into the room where the truth has been folding sheets at 4 a.m. And if you take only one line from Richard and Elena's story, take this one. A hotel can shine at street level and still be failing in its basement. Look downstairs. Or, if you prefer Elena's version, judge the rich by the door, not the speech. Keep that standard. Apply it to landlords, hotel owners, hospital boards, and anyone who signs a contract that turns a human pause into a filing. The story ends when the deadbolt clicks. The work continues every time a portal asks what happened instead of how much is owed. Dignity is not a chandelier in a ballroom. Dignity is heat in Unit 6C, hours that match rent, and a child who does homework at a desk instead of a folding table in a basement. If the story made you angry, good. Anger means you still recognize a basement when you see one. Now look at the buildings around you and ask who is folding the sheets. Ask who answers when the portal says no. Ask what your own systems call a person when the numbers stop performing. Then refuse to look away. The basement is still there. Go see it for yourself tonight without excuses.